Back in the day, before streaming, before CDs, we listened to music on albums. A vinyl disc spinning 33 and a third revolutions per minute brought us great music one side at a time. 20 or so minutes of music, 4 or 5 songs usually, that created a single listening experience. This format exposed us to other songs of the artist, not just the hits, and often flowed in an order that was created to build and maintain or mold a musical experience for the listener.
Sideshow brings musical experiences from the past to life today. Here, we discuss and review individual sides of record albums we have grown to appreciate and hope you will too. Welcome to The Sideshow.
Welcome back, everybody, to The Sideshow. We've got a great show for you today. Mike has got a side that he's going to bring to the table and we're going to talk about. So, Mike, why don't you lead us in?
All right. For today, my side is side 3 of the Beatles' White Album. Technically titled just The Beatles, but because of its plain white cover that many, if not most, people are familiar with, it's referred to pretty universally as the White Album. Side 3 is the side that I've selected for today's purposes. Before getting into that, just where the Beatles were at the time that the White Album was recorded. Most people who are interested in popular music are aware of the Beatles, if they don't outright like the Beatles. The initial popularity in the United States came about as a result of what was called Beatlemania, a term most people are familiar with. And their very first album ever came out in February of 1963, Please Please Me, followed later that year by With the Beatles. And then at the beginning of 1964, the movie and album Hard Day's Night came out. That was kind of the peak of Beatlemania, in my opinion. All of the songs on that album, which was the soundtrack for the movie, and I believe there were additional songs on the album, all of them were original compositions by Lennon and McCartney. The Beatles were kind of at their zenith of Beatlemania. The album Beatles for Sale, which came out later in 1964, following Hard Day's Night, was they kind of were catching their breath. They had to dig back and do some, there were like 8 or 9 cover songs on Beatles for Sale. It wasn't quite as powerful as some of the early material. But then in 1965, the movie Help and the album Help came out, which had songs from the movie, as well as some other songs. And that was where, in my opinion, Beatlemania, that was kind of the swan song of the Beatlemania years, the album and movie Help. That's where, because the next album, Rubber Soul, it was not a Beatlemania album. It was a different album. Do you agree with that?
I was going to say there was clearly a transition, I think, for a couple of reasons. First of all, Beatlemania was hard physically on the Beatles. The touring, the crowds, the nonstop pressure, the press that originally was all positive for them as their popularity was rising and the mania literally about it. Some of the press started to go the other way. For other reasons, and touring itself started to become incredibly difficult for them, which creates a lot of things. First of all, we don't want to tour as much, and we're actually finding more enjoyment, kind of exploring different types of music in the studio. And I agree with you. It was at that time period that you just started to see a different type of Beatles music until eventually they stopped touring altogether. And just would not, some special occurrences which were weird, but the notion of going on a tour at some point just stopped for them, obviously long before the White Album did, but that was the time period where you could really see that kind of change.
Well, and Help had great songs on it. The song Help, Yesterday, was
Mm-hmm.
on that album.
Yep.
Ticket to Ride was on that album. Hide Your Love Away. Classic Beatles songs. But then the cover of Ringo singing Act Naturally, not really, that was kind of filler.
Yeah.
Certainly by Beatles standards. But in any case, they moved on, and their next three albums, I think, are regarded by many people as a high water mark of sorts. Rubber Soul, Revolver, Sergeant Pepper. Rubber
And,
Soul.
and I mean, you really started to see this transition to like, look what we can accomplish
Yeah.
if we get into the studio and spend some time. And I think all three of those albums were progressively more exactly in that direction.
Rubber Soul was still kind of drums, bass, guitar oriented. There was a lot of piano, keyboards in there, but they were relatively conventional songs. Revolver got into some much more experimental type material, whether it's Eleanor Rigby or certainly Tomorrow Never Knows was as experimental as the Beatles got. But then, songs like just the arrangement of "Got to Get You Into My Life" was not that standard pop song formula in terms of how the music was put together, and Sergeant Pepper. I mean, we could talk about that forever,
Yeah.
but that was
Yeah.
that was sort of the peak of their, those three albums, Rubber Soul, Revolver, and Sergeant Pepper, was sort of 1, 2, 3 steps from, and then transition from Beatlemania type stuff to basically what the Beatles ended up becoming.
Yes.
To whatever
and that,
extent.
that experimentation in music potentially could have coincided with some additional experimentation with drugs. I mean, there's a slight notion that may be out there that those could have aligned in some way.
It's not outside the realm of possibility.
Yes.
But in any case, but then after, with Magical Mystery Tour, I mean, that was sort of their first kind of dud. And I'm talking about the film,
Yes.
as opposed to because there were a number of the song Magical Mystery Tour, Your Mother Should Know. I mean, I Am the Walrus, as experimental and strange as it is, it sounded like the Beatles playing together. But that album was also kind of fleshed out. It was, when it was released in England, it was to accompany the movie, and it was like an EP. It wasn't a full-blown album. And for the album that was released in the United States and is now kind of recognized as that album, Strawberry Fields, Penny Lane, a number of Hello Goodbye, those were all singles that had been released, and so that had already been out there, and so the album just sort of picked up the singles, and it was kind of a transitional album, and as a whole,
that also though that occurred after the death of their manager Brian Epstein, who was probably the only person in the world at that time who was able to tell them no. Don't do that. That's a stupid idea, or that's wandering a little bit too far. I mean, their producer, would do whatever. His job was to try to make whatever sound, whatever situation that that occurred. But Brian Epstein would actually tell them no, and he wasn't there to do that when they came up with this idea of let's just drive around in a bus with different celebrities in the British countryside and find out what happens, and nothing really did. So it's just an interesting, and I really think that was based. That wouldn't have happened if Brian Epstein was still alive. That's my thought on that.
I agree with you, and it's sort of fortuitous that you mentioned the death of Brian Epstein, because the band found out about the death of Brian Epstein, which was an accidental or not accident. It was an overdose of prescription medication was the cause of his death. But when the band members found out about his death, they were in Wales at a seminar being put on by the Maharishi about transcendental meditation.
Yes.
And they after this seminar they did go back and they finished up the movie, or they completed the movie and the material for Magical Mystery Tour.
Yeah.
And then all four band members, along with some other sort of, London scene makers, traveled to India to attend this 3-month thing at this location where the Maharishi had a setup in Rishikesh, in India, which is in northern India, not tremendously far by India standards from the Himalayas. And there was all sorts of spiritual nonsense that went on at that place while they were there. And most of with the exception of Harrison, most of the three other band members were, by the time they left, before they'd even got back to England, they were kind of disillusioned with where the Maharishi was coming from. But in any case, it was, in George Harrison's words, after they had all come back from India, he said that his heart was still in India, but he was back in the winter of discontent in London with the Beatles. And what were they doing? They were working on the White Album. So that's how he characterized the mood. So that was where the band was at when they were recording the songs for the White Album. And the simplest way to kind of describe the distinction between the White Album and the previous albums was that there was a lot more individual songwriting, and most of the songs on the album, not all, but most of the songs were basically songs that were written by McCartney, Lennon, or Harrison, and where the Beatles were kind of the backing band. It was like solo material with the other members of the band as the support.
And many of the songs that were not recorded with all of the band members playing in the song. Some of them actually just completely solo work of some of the members. So I would agree with you. It was a much more individual contributor type atmosphere, and quite frankly, that kind of showed up in the track list, and some of the early reviews of the White Album used terms like a mess to describe. You had these just dramatically different types of songs that were placed together on the album, really kind of shuffling in these different songs from these different players that created the ultimate track list for this double album.
Yeah. So in any case, that's where we're at with the White Album, and so let's go to side 3, which starts. The first track on side 3 of the White Album is "Birthday," and ironically, in light of what we were just talking about, in terms of the solo nature of a lot of the material, whether it's McCartney or Lennon or Harrison, "Birthday," I believe, is the only track on the album that was a 4-member effort. And the urban legend is that at that time, and this is in spring of 1968 is when this is happening, and at some point during that time frame, all 4 members of the Beatles and their wives or girlfriends, and they went out to see the movie "The Girl Can't Help It," which some of that soundtrack was performed by Jane Mansfield. Some of that soundtrack was performed by Little Richard. It's kind of like a rock and roll soundtrack, sort of their roots. The kind of stuff that they were listening to when the band very first formed. In the late 50s or very early 60s in Liverpool. And the legend, and maybe it's true. I don't know. I read this somewhere, but apparently after the movie, they were all fired up and kind of enthusiastic, and their basic gut level love of rock and roll was sort of rekindled, and so they went back to the studio and they recorded "Birthday." Someone had
Actually,
written it.
the story that I heard, again, a lot of these are legend and whatever, but that this song was that they actually met before the movie, knowing they were going to the movie, and Paul had these things bouncing around his head, but they really didn't know what they wanted to do with it as far as this song goes. But they went to the movie, and to your point, as a movie started at like 9 o'clock at night, and they went to the movie, and just all that came out of it, they all came, including with their wives, came back, and they spent till 5 o'clock in the morning, and that gave them the okay. This is what we're gonna do with this song, and the notion that they basically recorded the entire song in about 12 hours, including the time that they spent watching the movie, also made it very unique to a lot of the other songs on the album.
Well, and I assume that they may have recorded it, like as they say, live, like not like a live concert, but just they're playing the music in the studio, and that was not a lot of that, in a lot of the White Album material. So, and Birthday is just, the lyrics are self-explanatory. It wasn't, there was no big message, just happy birthday, but it's just a great, straightforward, guitar-oriented rock and roll song.
Yeah.
And so it really starts the side out great. And I must I'll kind of throw out there for interest, fun fact. Before our children were born, I played in a cover band here in town, and we played not like a Beatles cover band, but we were a band that played covers, and we performed Birthday, and believe it or not, I sang lead vocals, or not that I can sing, but in any case, and so it's just a good, straightforward rock and roll song, and people like it. And I don't think anything. I think that's basically how I would characterize that song. And did you have any additional? Do you disagree? Just basically, it's just a straightforward, no bullshit rock and roll song.
And I think the idea was, look, we want to do the notion of getting a little louder and a little rowdier was a part of kind of the overall strategy for this album, and these ideas kicking around in Paul's head. He didn't really know what he wanted to do, and it kind of popped in and said, birthday songs are popular. So it's like, let's take this notion of let's play some rock and roll to Birthday. It's kind of an exclamation point at the front of the side, right, to get the side going. So I totally agree.
All right, the second track on side 3 is called Your Blues, spelled Y-E-R, Your Blues. And it was very, very different from Birthday. It was a Lennon composition, and it was originally written or started in India. And he had shit on his mind, and was kind of feeling spiritually lost. And one of the things that had attracted him to this guy, the Maharishi, and so he kind of wanted to write a blues song, and apparently realized that he wasn't going to be able to do an authentic blues performance, like some of the actual blues artists that the members of the band had listened to, over the course of their music listening, blah, blah, blah. And so apparently what Lennon decided to do is sort of do a parody of the kind of heavy blues that were starting to come out in England around that time. Blues music had become more known and listened to and popular amongst white audiences, in the early mid-'60s. Like in the United States, the Paul Butterfield Blues Band put out stuff, and it found and that's fairly conventional, traditional blues music, Chicago blues. But in England, like the Jeff Beck Group, and the Yardbirds before them, and then eventually Led Zeppelin, and they were Led Zeppelin. I don't know if they'd been formed in the spring of '68, but they started performing in 1968, and and if you've a lot of people kind of consider the first Jeff Beck group album called Truth, and then the initial Led Zeppelin album is kind of being same thing.
Yeah.
And so just these like covers of blues songs done in this heavy guitar, sort of more cock rock kind of thing, which was different than the way that the original songs have been performed. So there are some people who characterize Your Blues as sort of a parody of that kind of thing.
I mean, I've heard that as well, and I can see where that comes from, especially the way that the song rolled out. I mean, even the title itself. I mean, YER, Your Blues instead of a Your Blues. I do think though that even though that's how it was presented, I do think the writing of itself though came from them being in India and this messaging from the Maharishi that look, what do you feel? What do you feel? And I think Lennon I'm literally going to write what I feel. I mean, he had a song on this album called "I'm So Tired." I mean, and this one as well. And if you listen to the lyrics, I mean, there's some definite feeling that is in these lyrics. So I don't believe I believe that the song, the presentation, did take I'm gonna poke some fun at some of these things that are happening, but I do feel there was some real emotion in there. And then finally on that, I mean, this is obviously a transition from traditional blues, which was based on a common experience of distress and blues that a group of people were feeling, which is your more traditional blues and from down south and back in the day. As opposed to my person is experiencing the blues and I'm feeling bad and whatever, which I think is also one of the things that was potentially being made fun of, as a part of this album as well. And good song though, good. I mean, it achieved that kind of kind of raucous kind of blues and got his emotions out because of it.
Well, and the fact that it was conceived or approached as, and maybe parody isn't the right word, but the fact that it was approached in that fashion doesn't mean it wasn't a serious. It didn't turn out to be a serious song, for purposes of artistic expression. I mean, it, that I'm lonely, wanna die. I mean, that's there's no that's kind of putting it out there.
Yeah,
and
that's not Weird Al Yankovic.
Yeah, he's putting it out there, and
yes.
Eventually, like at the beginning of John Lennon's solo career after the Beatles, he and Yoko had been engaged in supposedly primal scream therapy. Just this getting what's inside of you out. And the way that Lennon sings, parody or not, when he sings that, I'm lonely, I want to die. I mean, here's how I'm feeling. So it has, even though it's not as the way that the song was constructed, and let's really lay in the drums and bass, and because I mean the bass is really heavy in that song, and but there's no question that there's genuine emotion that comes through in the performance of that song.
And you could also see that as a window to some of the material that would come out when after Lennon left the Beatles. I mean, you look at you can draw some lines to some of his later music that very similar and kind of originated from that same kind of style and theme and what we get after the fact. So good tune though.
Now, and a very different song follows in track 3, Mother Nature's Son, which is a McCartney song, and that was one of the songs that was almost entirely performed by McCartney.
Yeah.
And there's some horns in there, and or some brass, I think, is maybe a more appropriate term, that would have been provided by George Martin, the producer.
Yeah.
But a very a sparse tune, both musically and lyrically, but also very. I mean, it's a beautiful song.
Yeah.
Just born a poor young country boy, Mother Nature's son, all day long. I'm sitting singing songs for everyone. I
Yeah.
mean, that's very simple. And is this going to be Song of the Year, or is this McCartney's? Of course not. But it's just a very delicate, beautiful song that someone could play with an acoustic guitar. And a lot of the song is taken up with the do 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 do
Yeah.
do do
Yeah.
do, that kind of stuff. And then sitting beside a mountain stream, see her water rise. Listen to the pretty sound of music as she flies. It's very simple, but delicately beautiful. And there's only like one more verse of actual lyrics, and it's the same kind of thing. Swaying daisies beneath the sun and stuff like that. So
well, it's the if first of all, coming again out of India and a push from some of the teachings that they were getting to is exploring how you're feeling about nature. And I think Paul McCartney had also really enjoyed, from back in the day, the song Nature Boy, which was kind of a standard. Nat King Cole did it, Ella Fitzgerald did it, whatever. But same type of thing where it's like this is an appreciation of just nature and being outside. And I think that tied to, time he spent in his youth doing exactly sitting beside mountain streams and seeing the water run and that came out from him. As just kind of a side note on a window into the creative process, certainly for Paul McCartney, and if you ever watched that documentary Get Back, you saw a lot of this as well. The Beatles, the last thing that they did was the lyrics. They started with complete opposite of like Elton John and Bernie Taupin's, where they started with the lyrics and moved back into the music. They started with the chords, and a lot of times as they were working it out, they were just using humming or mumbling or do 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 do, and then they figured they'd figure out the lyrics later. And a lot of times, I think they just decided, nah, this is fine the way it is. You saw that on not only this song, but songs like "Dear Boy" from Paul McCartney when he went solo. A lot of songs where they just left it like that. So kind of a window into how they wrote songs and when they just decided, we don't need any lyrics here. It kind of, we've set the stage and this humming or this doing really kind of does the trick for us. So just kind of a view into how they created these songs in the first place.
In another song that was originally started when the Beatles were in India. Mm-hmm. And just on the final note on that song, because this ties in with the solo aspect of the kind of the record and particularly this song. Apparently, when McCartney finished up the session where the final touches by him were completed in the studio, I read this somewhere, and I don't know if it's urban legend or it's true, but apparently John and Ringo came into the studio, and one of the engineers or people that were there said that you could cut the atmosphere with a knife.
Kind of fucked up the mood.
Yeah, because John and Ringo, because apparently John Lennon really did not like Paul McCartney, recording music while they were as the Beatles when the other band members weren't participating. It got under his skin. But in any case, speaking of John Lennon and India, number 4, a song that I always enjoy hearing, a Lennon track. Everybody's got something to hide except for me and my monkey.
Monkey, yes.
And this is one that's sort of directly inspired by some of the things that the Maharishi was saying, and apparently the "come on" was a term that the Maharishi would use. Come on is such a joy. Come on is such a joy. come on, let's take it easy. He'd say that, come on is such a joy, take it easy. And he would also say everybody's got something to hide.
Yes.
That was something that the Maharishi apparently said. So really, what the song was kind of a pastiche of phrases that the Maharishi used, and Lennon turned it into a song. And he threw in the "except for me and my monkey," and I guess we can, people can ponder what that means, but it's a great guitar song. I mean, there is and I don't know off the top of my head whether it's Lennon or George Harrison that's playing the guitar. If it was on Final Jeopardy, I would say Harrison. But it's a great guitar song. And a lot of the Beatles stuff that I like the most is guitar oriented.
Yeah.
Not all, but guitar oriented. And I don't know the specific type of bells or what the actual instrument, what percussion in the background, but there's this, it sounds like the dinging in a Vegas casino from the slot machines. It's hard to describe it, but there's these bells that are in the background, and the way that the vocals are, come on, 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 come on. And there's these bells in the background. It's just a very interesting song. It's really unlike any other song the Beatles did.
Yeah. But I found this at first, back early times listening to the White Album, I saw this as kind of a flyover song, right? Not that long, not just, it's like, what is this? Kind of like but with more listens, I mean, there's so much going on in the song. To your point, some guitar that is in there, and again, on this notion of we're going to get louder and we're going to be rowdier with this song, and then especially if you give this thing a listen with some headphones, there is so much going on in this song. For you talk about that, in the background there's this constant come on, come on, come on, and these other things that are happening, I think really trying to drive the hecticness of life, at the same time saying we've got this thing in common with, everybody's hiding stuff, everybody's living this life with some of the same problems and concern. It's much more interesting after a few listens. It was my experience in listening to this song.
Well, and just generally speaking about the White Album, I believe it was the 45th anniversary of these albums. The Beatles put out box sets, including Blu-ray discs with surround sound mixes and high resolution stereo and things like that of Sgt. Pepper, the White Album, and Abbey Road, and all of which I have acquired. If you have equipment to really play surround sound mixes, 5.1. If you've got the 5.1 setup with the subwoofer and the four speakers in the center and blah blah blah, the White Album's new mixing, it brings the drums and the bass kind of out, and you can hear, there's more separation between the instruments than there is in earlier recordings, because I've got the LP, I've got the original, just a conventional compact disc of the White Album, and these new mixes for the 45th anniversary box set, particularly on the drums and bass on the White Album, it's really almost like you're listening to it for the first time. I mean, the songs are the same, and it's not like it's. I mean, I don't want to overplay the point, but that the new mix makes a big difference on the White Album for that reason. Speaking of the Maharishi, the song number 5 on side 3 of the White Album is Sexy Sadie, and I believe it was written after the Beatles left India, but it was originally titled Maharishi, and apparently and Lennon, he kind of he was all in with the Maharishi. You know, Ringo only stayed in India for like 10 days, and then he's like, I can't take the food, and he split. And McCartney stayed like another month, but then he's like, nah, he grew bored with what was going on in India, and so he went back to England. And Lennon and Harrison stayed, but Lennon eventually, he caught wind of the fact that apparently the Maharishi was sort of putting the moves on some of the females that were there. You know, I think there were girlfriends and wives that were with the group that went to England, which included like Donovan. Apparently Mia Farrow was there. The song "Dear Prudence" was apparently inspired by Mia Farrow's sister. But in any case, so there's women around, you know, white women from England.
Yes.
And apparently the Maharishi started to kind of poke his nose into some Harvey Weinstein type overtures. I mean, I don't think it went, you know, that distance, but and it bummed Lennon out, and so it disillusioned him, is maybe the way. And so Sexy Sadie is you know, they determined that it would just be too in your face if he called it Maharishi, so they changed it to Sexy Sadie. But you know, you listen to the lyrics of Sexy Sadie, and you made a fool of everyone, you broke the rules, and the arrangement of Sexy Sadie is it's a good old Beatles guitar with piano in there. It sounds like a Beatles song. I mean, when you listen to it, there's no doubt this is just a Beatles song. I mean, when I talk about, what do you think?
I first of all, I agree on the song, and it is interesting the different type of experiences that the Beatles had in India. I read a thing that at least John started on these lyrics while he was waiting for the cab to come pick them up from where they were to take them to the airport, and that, you know, at least in something that Paul had said later, in something that I had read, I mean, Ringo just went there thinking it would be a party, right? And Paul went there thinking, look, this is someone who can really teach us how to, you know, get into this meditation more, a person that might be able to, you know, just teach us a little bit more about this. John saw him more as something a little more elevated than just, you know, a person who can teach us do this. I think he saw him at a little higher level, and so his disappointment was significantly greater than, I mean, you know, Ringo's like, yeah, the party's not that great here, so I'm out of here. And, you know, Paul, like, look, I've taken everything I can from this guy, and if he turns out to be kind of a jerk, that's, I mean, as a lot of teachers are. But, you know, and George, it seems, separate from the, you know, the Maharishi himself, was able to make the spiritual connection, and at that point it had nothing more to do with the Maharishi anymore. So John was really the one that was the most let down and disappointed and angry, I guess, by the way things turned out there. So and then this song, it is exactly what you said. You can hear that anger in the lyrics, and then aside from that, it is a fairly conventional, you know, guitar and keyboards type Beatles song that they were coming out with at the time. Interesting song though.
In the guitar line as the song is fading out, it sounds like the Beatles. Yeah. So in any case, the next track, number 6 on side 3, Helter Skelter, and very different from Mother Nature's Son.
Yes.
And I don't believe that there's any Indian, you know, or India influence in that song. What I've read and actually heard Paul McCartney in interviews talk about is, if I recall correctly, it was Pete Townsend, or it might have been Roger Daltrey, but it was one of those two from the Who, and they were talking about one of their songs, and I believe it was "I Can See for Miles," which kind of has that stinging guitar.
Yeah.
So let's say it's Pete Townsend, and Pete's talking about, oh, we just have this just raucous, loud, in your face rock and roll guitar, blah blah blah, and so McCartney starts thinking, well, kind of sort of a one-upsmanship kind of thing.
Yeah.
Well, we can make a screechier noise than you guys can, and so he kind of came up with this song that was going to be just sort of a loud, raucous,
dirty
rock and roll, boom, and so as far as the music for Helter Skelter, that was the the basis, at least what's been said and written about it. Now the lyrics, the significance of the term Helter Skelter to an English boy that grew up in Liverpool at the time that McCartney and Lennon did was like if the carnival came to town or the circus came to town or that kind of thing. It was apparently this like sort of like a conical tower, and there was a stairway where you'd go up and you'd get to the top, and then a slide would kind of spiral around the cone to get down to the bottom, and that was called like mummy, can we go on the Helter Skelter? That kind of thing. That's what it was. And so it's when I get to the bottom, I go back to the top of the slide. Then I stop and I turn and I go for a ride. Then I get to the bottom and I see you again. So that's what it's about. I'm coming down fast. Now, it's sort of like, he's after a woman and there's it's sort of a kind of a street level approach to the situation. But there is a book, and I don't know when it was published originally, but would have been relatively shortly after the Beatles. It would have been in 1969, 70, 71, that neck of the woods. I can't remember the name of the author, but it's not so much a book that was written, it's a book that was illustrated. It's called The Beatles Illustrated Lyrics.
Mm-hmm.
And they have the lyrics of many Beatles songs, and they have illustrations for artists that are putting various interpretations in. And the illustration for Helter Skelter, it's got a naked woman, from mid thigh up, and on top of her head there's like a little thing, like a little gazebo with a rail around it. And then a slide starts coming out, and it goes around the back of her neck, and then it comes around over her shoulder and like above her breasts, and it goes around her back, and it comes around again underneath her breasts, and then it comes around one more time, and then there's an opening right where her crotch is, and there's these little guys that are sliding down the slide from on top of her head, and the slide goes into this sort of like tunnel opening where her crotch is supposed to be. So that's one interpretation of what Helter Skelter was about. But now later, most people are aware of the fact that Charles Manson co-opted that term and whatnot. But it was it was about a slide, a guy that has the hots for a woman, and will you go on the Helter Skelter with me? Or it's a pretty simple idea.
Yeah, it wasn't about the dissolution
song
of society and our our foundations. Exactly.
Yeah.
They also I really think that the lyrics had far less to do with what they were trying to do than the notion of really create this loud, rowdy, dirty rock and roll. And they brought themselves back to a point when they used to just jam. Or used to perform for extended periods of time. I mean, the first take for this song when they went in there took 10 minutes. The second take took 12, and the third is which actually took most of the material. They played for 27 minutes. in the studio, just jamming. I mean, and I think it was really, again, part of this notion how they went into the studio for this album in the first place. It's like, no, we can be louder and rockier, and it certainly came out in this song. And I think to me, that when this song kind of gets going and then it settles back down again, bow no 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 no, bow no no. I mean, that is just. I mean, it just holds you. It is great rock and roll. Without any doubt.
When there's one of those earlier takes is on the Beatles anthology series,
Yeah.
and it's about 10 minutes, and it's kind of like a blues dirge, something not unlike Led Zeppelin would do, and I think they nope, not raucous enough, not loud enough,
Yeah.
not irritating enough, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But in any case, Helter I got blisters on my fingers. I mean, it was intended to be kind of loud and in your face.
Yeah.
And
they were successful.
I agree. I mean, I mean, I remember the first time I heard that on the radio as a kid. I thought, oh, that must be a Paul McCartney solo. No, it's not. That's not just Paul. That's the Beatles. Like, that's not the Beatles. That's not what the Beatles sound like.
Yeah.
Because it ain't She Loves You.
Yeah.
Or I Want to Hold Your Hand.
Yep.
And just a kind of a tangential note here on the simple basis for some song lyrics. Another song on side 2, Why Don't We Do It in the Road?
Yeah.
What in the Sam Hill is that about? Well, while they were in India, the wildlife in India is different than it is in England and in other places. And apparently McCartney was in his room and he's looking outside, and there are 2 baboons mating.
Yes.
And they're in the road. And he's thinking like, oh, hope they don't get hit by a car before they're done, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And well, next thing you know, he's got a song.
Yep. Why don't people do that?
All right, we are now to the last song on side 3 of the Beatles' White Album, which is George Harrison's Long, Long, Long. And don't need to take a lot of time talking about this one. A very simple song, very sparse lyrically, not unlike Mother Nature's Son. And the just looking at the lyrics on the face of things, it's been a long, long time. How could I ever have lost you when I loved you? Blah blah. And the short answer is Harrison was writing about God and how the time he spent in India, or he's not talking about that, but how his time in India sort of rekindled his relationship with God is what the song is about. And so it's a short, it's really a very beautiful song. Not one of the better known on the album, but just a beautiful, good, a song that makes you feel good. You don't feel like the end of some of the everybody's got something to hide, Sexy Sadie.
Yeah.
Or Your Blues. You're kind of like, oh, geez, but it's a very calming, blissful song.
Yeah, and at the same time, I mean, it descends a little bit into the avant-garde at the very end of the song. And I mean, I would agree with you. It certainly is not an edgy song. It's a calming, peaceful, demonstrating the peace that he clearly felt. Now that he had brought himself more in touch with God. At the same token, it's not it doesn't come off as a religious song either. It's just it's a pleasant, beautiful, peaceful song.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why it's a good song is there is certainly no need to take it as a religious song.
Yeah.
Unless you want to. And if you just want to look at it as a thought about a man ruminating or a person ruminating about someone in a positive way as opposed to a negative way. And so a good way to end the side, not unlike the last song on side two, Lennon's Julia.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you listen to all of side two and then you come to that song and then it's over and you just, that was a beautiful song.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I think when you come to that end. And I know what you mean about sort of the avant-garde nature, the ending of Long, Long, Long. But that's usually what I feel. That was a beautiful song. So, in any case, there you have, and that is the last song on the side. That is side 3 of the Beatles' White Album.
Okay, so just a note about the album itself, The Beatles, which again commonly referred to as the White Album. I always like to focus one of the benefits or things that I've always enjoyed about vinyl record albums is the physical album itself. I've had this album for 40 years. I think embossed on it, you can't. There's no coloration, but it's the Beatles. Also embossed on these is an individual ID number for each that is sold. My particular number was 316471. The album itself, again, front and back, just completely blank. A little very basic, but the pictures of them on the inner cover. There's some. I still have the content that comes with them. There's headshots of each of the band members that came along with the album. Poster style type things. I kept them with the album, and then finally a poster, which is it's kind of fucking weird. The poster that came along with it. There's some kind of disturbing images that are in here, and then other just. It seems like just kind of random shots of them either doing recording, not necessarily right during this time period either. There's some variance in some of the time period of some of these. And the poster opens up, and on the back of the poster we have the lyrics to the songs. So some interesting kind of extra stuff that came along with it, and again the whole notion, the physical aspect of a vinyl record. Sometimes there was some additional candy that came along with, which was also some great music with the White Album, especially on side 3 that we've talked to today. So thanks, Mike, for that. Good show, and we will catch you next time.
Sounds good.